All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. As always, today a very special episode with my friend Yanik Constantine, who is also a health practitioner. Although, just like me, he doesn't have a medical degree or anything like that. He's just been studying this for a long time and fixing his own health problems and helping other people with their health problems. And we did an episode before called the Phoenix Protocol or the Phoenix Program, which is his program that he came up with. And so if you want to know where he came from and what his program is sort of about, check the first episode. But today we're going to talk about food and not really what to eat, but when to eat. It's a pretty convoluted subject. You get a lot of people saying that intermittent fasting is the best way to go. You've got a lot of people saying that eating throughout the day is the best way to go. So which is it? Yannick, how do we start this conversation off?
Well, that's a pretty good topic. There are a lot of fads out there, right? So, I think it has to do with viewing how we used to do things before. Before we were in cities, before food was coming out of Walmarts. So what were we doing before? Well, ethology is a really good comparative behavioral science that really goes from biology to ecology. And it kind of like puts us into like, okay, which type of species do what? What are we doing? Where do we fit in? Like, are we more like, certain monkeys or apes that are eating 8 times a day or more times? They're constantly eating. Or are we more like a type of I don't know, a carnivore, highly skilled carnivore like a wolf that can eat a huge amount of its own body weight and live for long. So it can eat once every so much. So if we start like looking at those factors, then we can start getting ideas of, okay, how much should we eat? Which types of food should we eat? So considering that, well, we pretty much eat like 2 to 3 times per day, right? There's studies, there's research out there that's showing like, okay, so as opposed to certain monkeys and apes, we don't eat as much, and our large intestine and small intestine, they're more going towards the carnivores, right? So we're not really there yet completely, but we are kind of like in the process of like the evolutionary process, right? So if we consider that, well, when to eat, well, we are diurnal animals, right? A species. Whereas we need light. I was just writing about this yesterday in the neurofeedback groups and explaining it as in, okay, so we need light and we are tribal, we're social, right? So we have to go and hunt. So there are certain times to do that. That means there are certain times to eat. You know, after you hunt, we didn't have fridges. We didn't even use salt that way to store food before. So what did we do? We would hunt and we would eat at that moment, get the reward, right? Not just the food, but also the reward from hunting and also take it back to your nest, the tribe.
Mhm.
But that wasn't really done at night. It had to be done in the day, right? So if you have a custom to not eat in the entire day and just have a meal at night, well, that really isn't the way to go. Now, at what time would be a good time? You know, well, women weren't going for hunting, men were. They would gather, they would have certain resources at home. They would have, they would be a little bit more, uh, they would be more proximate to food, right? Certain fruits and nuts and certain things that men would go out there and they would just be killing it literally, right? So in that aspect, it's like, okay, well, and we're not functionally the same. We did not have the same roles. We didn't eat so many times per day, probably, at least not these amounts.
Are you
Would
saying
you
there might
agree
be a
to that?
difference between men and women as well on what they
Right.
should eat?
Yeah. And yes, yes, including, for example, mostly when it comes to fasting, because the foods would be the same, right? But in any case, well, we don't carry babies. We don't eat as much fat. So there are these there's even research out there going for okay, so it's more of a the fatter you were going towards the cold places, then you would find like figurines of women that they were like even fatter, and there was a price and a value for that. So it was more of a survival of the fattest, right? We talked about this last time. I think it was like, yeah, I mean, if we were like to eat the way we were eating in really cold places, we probably wouldn't make it. You know, we would have to gain fat, and for several reasons. So women, for starters, BMI index isn't really that useful. The sweet spot seems to be in the overweight, not in the normal range, and not in the underweight. And women do carry more fat, you know.
And there's a lot of
So
women out there
considering that,
that are trying to run on the treadmill, like burn 3,000 calories on the treadmill or something like that. But biologically, they're not supposed to be that slim. They're supposed to have more body
they
fat than men.
aren't.
And if they lose, if they go
Yes.
down to even what's considered like normal body fat, they may get pretty serious symptoms like menstrual pain or the complete cessation of menstruation in general. Especially this is very, very common with athletes and weightlifters. So very obviously, biologically, this is a huge, huge red flag saying, hey, ladies, we're not supposed to be this slim. It like literally stops your hormone system from working properly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's just so obvious, right? But well, it should be, right? But so where do we fit, right? So survival of the fittest is actually not that we fit into clothes, you know? It's more of where we fit, where, you know, when we do things. So how do we fit? Where do we fit? That's really the true take of survival of the fittest. Not the strongest. This idea is it's a translation type of thing, error, misconception. So so women, well, they wouldn't be going out there being suicidal to get food, but we were, right? We're more expendable. We're not that valuable as women. I mean, you could lose two men, you know, going out hunting, and it's not the same as if you were to lose two women, which would also be, you know, organizing things in society. So when you know that, when it comes to fasting, I mean, it's clearly not the same as men and women. So when to eat, for example, going back to the like the question, having that background and context, well, women they need more body weight. So sometimes you can open up the eating window and close it up a little bit more for intermittent fasting or time restricted fasting, which is, you know, the technical name for it. But women should probably be more of a less, you know, cycle in and out of fasting in shorter rounds and bouts than men. It also does depend on your weight, right? So how long should you fast? So when it comes to eating and not eating, you know, this rhythm, it will be different between men and women. That is, and actually almost all the research out there is, I think 75% or more is for men. So when you're reading about fasting, you're actually reading about fasting in men mostly,
Hmm.
right? So when it comes to when to eat and when to eat, well, clearly there are more advantages in we don't have such a pronounced hormonal cycle like women do. So when should you fast? Even then, like during your period, before your period, you know, when should a woman do that? So you start really going into the uh, those like specifics, and you learn like, okay, yeah, it can be useful because we have an abundance of food. We probably shouldn't be eating 3 times per day all the time, or those amounts, or what to eat, you know, more morning to later in the afternoon and night, you know. So women probably have to fast a lot less. They would have to focus on a set point, a BMI, and more fat than men. But the tendency is to be like very slim, very man-like muscular now, which is not a fit, at least not to that extent, So I mean that's part of it. I don't know if you have something to add to that or your view on it,
Well,
Ryan.
you make an interesting point that, yeah, a lot of the research, I would believe that 75% of the research is with male volunteers. So you get a lot of information that's out there presented in a generic way, like, oh, intermittent fasting helps with memory or cognition. And women are reading this like, oh, okay, I'll do this too, but it's not being specified like, hey, these test subjects were male.
You're right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. So
nutritionally, we're pretty much the same. Women need a little bit more, like across the board, they need a little bit more of the nutrients. There isn't massive differences there, except that they lose more nutrients during menstruation and childbirth than men do. But yeah, for eating it, it seems to make quite a lot of sense, especially because yeah, their BMI is supposed to be a little bit higher, and their musculature is different. So yes, men are built, I think, to work more, to move their muscles more. And of course, men don't live as long as women as well. I think that has to do a little bit with their uh, relatively less stress lifestyles. And I would also imagine that women, both in the hunter-gatherer sense and in the homestead sense, because all the longest lived populations today, and for the last 150 years at least, they're all homesteading populations. They're not hunter-gatherers, right? They have agriculture, they have animals, they have stuff. But the women tend to be hanging out more around the house than the men. And I do imagine they'd be eating more frequently throughout the day. So you think that's good? They should be doing less fasting.
yes, they should be doing less fasting. Also, to get fat, it's not easy to get fat off protein. So you can even kind of like start digging a little bit more of which types of foods. There had to be some variation there. You really want sugars and starchy types of foods to get fat quicker, as opposed to protein. So even in that aspect, well, men, I mean, and women, there might be a difference there. I don't think it's been researched. I don't, I haven't even heard of this idea, but it's just like, okay, just look at the body and retro engineer. What do you need to get fat? You know, and to have a little bit more fat retention like women do.
Carbs, yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, also like how many times per day can you eat? Well, it depends. I mean, I think it depends very much on the season. For example, is it cold? Is it warm? You know, Also, do you need more fat? Do you need more energy to create fat to insulate yourself a little bit more, protect your temperature and not use it up and have these energy spikes and glucose spikes? So I think depending on where you are, you may need to eat a little bit more and more frequently, like up to the north or to the south from the equator. Um, so that has to do also with how much, when. And so it's a seasonal thing, right? And actually, most people, they gain a lot more fat during the last season. I don't think it's just because of Christmas and, people getting together. I mean, it has a lot to do with it, but is it really only that? Or are you kind of like also trying to compensate and cope with temperature? Because when it's warm we get a lot of energy from that thermal energy, right? But
Mm.
when it's cold we have to use our adrenals, yeah, the hormones. We have to use more testosterone, well, men, right? Testosterone and others, but mostly adrenaline and cortisol, right? We need to be like activated and get energy and resources and take it from bad, or just like keep going. So considering that, the more we go into winter, it's probably natural to eat more of these types of foods as opposed to when it's warm. If it's really hot, well, then, extremes, right? It gets a little bit tricky there. But I would probably say between 2 and 3 times per day would be fine. Also, the amount of food, eating a little bit later in the day, but you don't want to get to like 1 o'clock forever and do that. I've already gone through fasting while I exercise. lift weights. In the beginning, you feel really good. You have like this pump, you have this potency, the power. But after time, you start getting fatigued. Yeah, well, you're relying on those hormones constantly, and it starts, changing. So you have to really play with it. You can't just stick to, okay, let's do 2 meals a day forever, 1 meal a day forever. Fast and never stop fasting, or fast more than you don't fast. No, it's like a rhythm. Eat, don't eat, and you can play with that. So but for example, if you are very thin, then you have to eat more, and you need more nutrients to process that, right? There's, just pretty much just no way out of that one. If you have a lot more weight on you and you want to lose it, then you want to fast more, and then you want to eat less frequently, and then you want to shift different foods. So it really depends on where you are at and when.
Let's hit this skinny person thing because we all know somebody, at least one person who's super skinny, and people say, "Oh, they could just eat whatever they want." And usually they can actually eat a ton of food, like more than me or something, they're very slim and yet they can eat all this food. But you're saying I'm kind of interpreting that because their metabolism's so fast, they need more.
It may be fast, or no, maybe they're not even absorbing as well.
I was
I
gonna
used
say
to be
because
one
maybe
of
yeah,
those.
maybe they have an
Yeah.
absorption problem as well. People think that, we talk a lot about gluten intolerance, and usually it does cause the body to gain weight. But so people listen to our message and they hear that, oh, okay, well, this causes you to gain weight all the time. Not all the time. Sometimes it causes you to not be able to lose weight if you have gluten intolerance and you're eating gluten, or dairy intolerance and you're eating dairy, some food that you're intolerant to. It usually is gluten, but yeah, it absolutely could cause you to be super, super skinny. And many of these people, they're skinny, but they don't look healthy. Their skin isn't great. If you talk to them about their digestion isn't great either. So clearly something is wrong. And yeah, once they get rid of that inflammation, they should start to gain weight. If they keep eating the same amount of food, they might gain too much weight over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was my case. But I was also eating a lot of food. And I was also eating, I was craving these junk foods. So, I mean, my cells weren't breathing clearly. I wasn't growing that much. My muscles, everything, it was just so skinny. And then you would have more peaks because you don't have the metabolic flexibility. You don't have the stores. You don't have the fat stores. So you finish up your glucose, your glycogen, and you don't have fat stores, then where do you go? Well, you'll have a panic attack. You'll have all these types of different physiological issues, right? So so being underweight is a lot, that's actually, there's a lot more risk there than being morbidly obese, even morbidly obese too, and using the BMI. And that is also where I have encountered my most difficult clients, not the ones that are a lot more overweight, but the ones that are underweight. And I can also attest to that through my personal experience. I was just like eating and eating, and everyone was like, where's that going? Right. But I was getting also sick sometimes. I was like, not sometimes, it was general. Um,
I would put liver problems as one of those big suspect problems when somebody is super skinny.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I would say also absorption, also anorexia. So anorexia isn't just like this idea that you have a perceptual issue. It's really like, okay, so when you're really low on certain nutrients like vitamin B1, you stop eating. And you see this a lot with athletes. They are from 3 times to 2 times to 1 time per day. Their voice starts going down. They barely want to do anything. They start becoming depressed. They start getting suicidal thoughts. And then they get on the nutrients. They start eating they start being a little bit more hungry. They start getting more energy, so you use up your resources. While you're using them up, you're also eating up a lot of food to try and like rebuild, but without the nutrients. And usually paired with not enough rest time because we're always putting like the value, this high value on do things. And if you don't do and you rest, you're lazy, but you need sleep to rebuild from all that damage and, balance out again.
I think sleep is very, very connected to eating patterns, and we'll circle back to that. But
Yeah.
uh, I do want to explain this low glucose thing, but I also want to say quickly that a lot of people, especially when they listen to us, they think that nutrient deficiencies cause cravings always. And while it's true that especially mineral deficiencies, especially some key ones like iron and calcium and salt, those will cause cravings that, people can eat paint chips and light bulbs and kitty litter and all kinds of stuff if they get severely mineral deficient in those key minerals. But other nutrient deficiencies can absolutely cause anorexia. And this is not us making it up. This is in textbooks. This is standard. And vitamins too. A lot of them are vitamins, but yeah, completely figured out in animals. We know our animals will stop eating if they get low on this stuff. And yeah, so we actually do say that anorexia is mostly a nutrient deficiency. Like you said, it's not a psychological thing. Some people, I'm sure they starve themselves just to be skinny, but we say the majority of it is actually a nutrient deficiency, and it can be fixed, and people can get their appetite. If they are mineral deficient and they have too much appetite, when they start on the nutrients, the appetite should go down. And if they are too skinny or they're malabsorbing or they have been somewhat anorexic from vitamin deficiencies, especially, then once they start on the program, they should get hungrier. Your body will figure that out for you. But I also wanted to explain this glucose thing. So I think this is like the main reason that intermittent fasting is recommended because most of us are used to eating all the time, especially high glycemic foods like grains and processed sugar, which when you eat any food, but especially a high glycemic food, you get a blood sugar spike, right? When it's high glycemic, you get more of a blood sugar spike than a low glycemic food. Just I know there's a lot of people listening who won't understand what's going on here. So when you have that glucose spike, blood sugar is glucose. When you get that spike, it will start to crash pretty quickly, especially if it's a high glycemic food. And that's what gets you hungry again to spike it again. So you're running on a blood sugar roller coaster, basically. And that's a bad thing. But this intermittent fasting concept is that if you don't eat, then you're producing less glucose. And you said it, I'll just elaborate a little bit more. Your body burns glucose, it uses glucose. Your cells eat glucose. And if there's no glucose there, then it has to burn fat. This is the whole keto concept, right? Once you stop giving it glucose, your body has to switch into fat burning mode, which is far more efficient. It's like 8 or 9 times more efficient, right? You get, I think that's the number, 8 or 9 times more energy from fat, a fat molecule, than you do from a glucose molecule. And of course, this is part of the keto weight loss, intermittent fasting weight loss concept, just to starve out the glucose so that your body is forced to burn the fat molecules. And as you said, a lot of people are so skinny, they don't have any excess fat to burn anyway, so they can just crash into low blood sugar and, like you said, get panic attacks or seizures or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it is more efficient as in, okay, you get the ketone bodies, you get the fatty acids in your blood, you use them up. They don't, it doesn't require insulin, right? You still get enough glucose from the glycerol backbone, which is part of the the triglyceride that's breaking down in your, like the glycogen, the starch, it breaks down, you get fatty acids, you get some glucose, not much, and that's enough to fuel your brain. So yeah, you can live off that. It can be actually really good for your brain, for your nerves, for regeneration. It is very efficient. You get high energy, but for how long? If you do this for a long time, you start gaining insulin resistance. You start getting other issues because, I'm talking about more prolonged fasting, as in days fasting, like 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, um, so how long and what is our own internal demand for it too? I mean, how much are we performing, right? We're mobile creatures. We move. We're doing things. We're not a plant. We're just not just like absorbing things and growing stronger and structural, right? We have to move and do things. So the more we do, the more we think, the more we work, the extended hours, artificial light, night, well, the more we'll need nutrients, right? But the thing is, since there's also another reason for eating, which is not just pike or cribbing behavior, which is very typical of Dr. Wallach mentioning. It's great, right? But it's not just that. There's something called also displacement behavior, which is pretty much, you're stressed and you're eating more.
Or you're bored.
Um, yeah, yeah, and you're
Boredom,
bored and you're like,
huge
oh,
one.
I don't know
Boredom.
what to do. Yeah, I mean, because we would usually, I mean, under natural circumstances, which we cannot study humans because they're not out there, we're out of the proverbial Garden of Eden, right? So we can't really study other humans in a natural environment, but we can have an idea, it's what would be what would we be doing there, and in terms of how many times we eat and all these other aspects, and even how much, and it would really not be the same amount. I mean, would you, or would we be that stressed? I mean, we walk out in the city and we're seeing a lot of humans, and that stresses us out. There's just no way. Every single human you see, it creates like an impulse. It's not really something that's conscious, but it'll drain you. So just walking through a city block, and the way to compensate for it is like acting like there's no one there. So when you see people walking over other people, it's not like they're, oh, we go into this, oh, you don't have a heart or emotions, and you should go with that homeless person and give them something, and you go into this side of guilt game. Well, no, it's because you're the way you have to compensate and treat it for your nervous system is like treat it as a log. It's like a log there. So
Like a New
you
Yorker,
just
basically. They can walk by
basically,
anything and
or
they're not paying attention. They don't care. They're in their own world. You kind of have to, you're saying,
yeah,
or you just get too stressed out.
they
Think about
have
all these
to.
people.
No, they have to. Do you imagine what it would be to go through a New York City block and say hello to everyone and have all the hi, how are you doing to every single person?
How's your mom?
You
To everyone.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, to everyone. You would be drained at the end. I mean, you would just be like so fatigued. There is no way. So, tribal group animal, probably between, it seems it would be like 30, 40 people we already knew working together, living. Right now, you can see more of that in a single block. So how would you do that? Are we made for that? Well, we're certainly not. So then you get into displacement behavior. You're eating for stress, for boredom, because you're not doing things. I mean, we're in like a room that is very unnatural, just lines. We're in a box. We put ourselves in a box. We're not
Hmm.
seeing like all this variety in nature, like the trees and the leaves and all our nervous system and everything. It's like constantly like scouting and having these new aspects and sensations. Even the same tree is going to look a little bit different tomorrow. It will never be the same, as opposed to a room, which is the same,
Well, a lot of
right?
people, everybody knows that when you go to a beach, just the sound of the waves coming in and out, it's very, very peaceful. It's very, very calming. And it's like you don't need to do anything else. You can just sit there on the beach. A lot of these people, for the rest of their life, their normal life, they need to be constantly distracted and all this stuff, but they just go to the beach and they could just sit there and do nothing. And yet it's always this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing in our normal lives, constant stimulation. And similar, sitting around a campfire, you just hear the cicadas in the background and the leaves rustling from the wind. It's so peaceful. And yeah, you could just sit there and look at the fire. You don't need to do anything else. I'm pretty guilty of this as well. I get super bored inside and notice that when we go out to the forest, I don't need those stimulants. I don't need to snack. We don't need to be smoking joints and drinking wine. I can just hang out by the fire. No big deal. But yeah, I get very, very understimulated in the room. The clock ticking drives me nuts. The room is so still inside of the house. I always have music playing in the background kind of to keep me company and break up the monotony of just being in an empty room. And I don't like to watch TV all the time and stuff, but I imagine there's a lot of people who keep the TV running just because it fills up that emptiness. And yet just go outside and the emptiness it's gone. The birds are chirping and the wind's blowing or the rain is raining. I don't know. There's just those natural sounds and movements keep you stimulated. And to comment on this city
It
thing,
just
yeah,
feels so good, doesn't
it does. Well, it's
it? I
it's
mean,
therapy. The city freaks me out big, big, big time. That thing about being overwhelmed by people, I get that immediately. I get that at the grocery store in our little town. And I'm not talking about anxiety or something. It's discomfort. It's overwhelming. There's too many people around, too many people talking to me or whatever. I just came to visit you recently in Hollywood. And that whole trip was crazy for me. We had to see people and drive here and there, and we're in cities, we're in San Diego, we're in LA, and totally overwhelming for me. And yeah, we had to meet you, we had to meet this other person, we got to meet this other person, we got to do a dinner date, we got to do totally, totally overwhelming. And when we went back to Texas, I was basically sick. Pretty much as soon as we got to the airport on the way back, my body just released all this tension from the trip. And I was the one
Yeah.
doing all the driving too, so it was extra stressful. Trying to get out of LA, I'm sitting there like, just let me out. It takes you hours to just leave the city. Just get me out of here. But by the time we got to the airport, yeah, I just had this sigh of relief, and it came with a sense of sickness at the same time. And when we got back, yeah, my throat was sore. I was losing my voice. I felt sick, not like a flu or anything, just like I needed a whole week or two to recover from that. It is overwhelming being around so many people and being around such busyness and traffic and all this stuff. And I spend so much time away from it that it really, really gets me when I'm exposed to it.
It is a stressor, and a stressor is gonna create these hormones, and then we also eat to reduce those hormones to burn them up, just like moving. So there's where you also get the displacement behavior, and that's where you need, so you just see it's also it's just very unnatural to be under these conditions. They are not they call it, like a concrete, like New York, a jungle, or it's not like a jungle. It's a zoo. We're all in boxes. Right?
Mhm.
Oh yeah. So yeah, these conditions, they're just not natural. Drain us. We have other forms of compensation, and it's, eating a lot is one of eating a lot of times, and eating like these stimulating types of foods you with MSG, ammonium, oh, I forgot the name of it. Cheetos, Lay's, all the chips, all these foods have it, monosodium glutamate. So yeah, they'll just stimulate you constantly. And it's even known in transactional analysis, right? They call it strokes, is this type of sociology, sorry. And it's like, okay, so why do people like fight a lot? Why are they going into this like role playing, like they call it social games, right? Because you have to stimulate your nervous system somehow. I mean, it's not the same as going out into, nature in the forest, like you said, and you just feel you don't have, you're not getting like hungry and eating stuff. Well, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay.
So
So,
this whole concept of intermittent fasting, I get a lot of guys and girls, mostly women. Our audience is a bit weird. We get a lot of older women and younger men, so guys and women.
mhm,
Both of them try intermittent fasting. It's very, very popular. A handful of women, not very much. I'm thinking like three or four that I can actually remember. Three or four of them do intermittent and do well on it. At least they say they do well on it. Everybody else doesn't. The men tend to do better on it. And I think it's partially psychological and laziness. For me, I know it's laziness. I've been intermittent fasting for several years, probably 8, 9, maybe even 10 years, something like that. And it was mostly out of poverty. I couldn't afford to eat 3 meals a day, so I ate one meal a day and a snack, if there's
mhm,
money and time, or make one dinner and have another serving of it later or something like that. But one main meal, and we still operate that now. Chef Norman and I, we live together half the time, and then I live with my wife the other half of the time. My wife basically makes me eat twice a day at least, and she eats breakfast. She eats 3 times a day. But
mhm,
Chef Norman and I, we've been on this one meal a day schedule for a long time. In fact, he's cooking lunch for us right now. Lunch is dinner to us, basically. We kind of eat dinner in the middle of the day, and we're even running a little bit late today. I can't say it's optimal. It is convenient. It's very, very convenient. And I think that's why a lot of guys are willing to do it, because they are lazy and they don't want to buy processed food and stuff out there too. So they just eat their one meal and they tell themselves they're doing great on it. And I told myself for a long time I'm doing great on it as well, but I unequivocally feel better when I am on the 2 meals a day. And my wife tends to make me eat that first meal earlier. So it's not intermittent fasting anymore, basically. And I have lived in a blue zone, one of the blue zones, the Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica. Worked there periodically through a period of 4 years, and we live with the villagers there and stuff. So I know how they do it. and they have adopted more modern stuff now. Like they have Coca-Cola. They don't all drink it, but like it's sold in the town, and
Yeah.
they'll drink beer and stuff that's from Germany or something, imported junk foods. They do have them. They have cell phones now and stuff like that. They have several more modern things. They watch football on TV now. I know they didn't do that before, but they still eat 3 times a day. And I found it interesting, Yannick, that in the villagers' homes, number one, they eat 3 times a day. Number two, it's pretty much the same meal. It's rice, beans, their special cheese that they make, and maybe a little bit of fish for the dinner or for the lunch, but it's mostly
Hmm.
just rice and beans and cheese. That's their main food. And they'll have some fruits. They grow avocados and bananas. It just grows wild there. There's a bunch of different fruits and stuff that grow wild, and they'll send the kids up the tree to get a coconut now and then and stuff. They'll incorporate that stuff, but it's mostly uh, rice and beans and their corn tortillas, but their corn is mixed with wood ash, so it
Yeah.
brings up the calcium. Yeah, it's very, very simple. But I found it interesting that at the hotel for the tourists in the area, they feed you fruit for breakfast. Like we've got this idea now, modern health gurus and stuff, that fruit is very, very good. We should be having fruit all the time. And I just found it very interesting that they feed the tourists fruit, and then the locals, they do eat some fruit, but that's not the basis. They don't have fruit for breakfast ever. None of them. They always have rice and beans and their tortilla and their cheese and some coffee. They like coffee there. But it was just opposite for tourists. Tourists is like what you expect a healthy meal to look like, and maybe the rice and beans is too boring for them. I'm not sure, but very interesting that the yuppie hippie people that want to stay there, they love that. Oh, this is amazing. We got fruit for breakfast, and yet, yeah, that's not what the locals are eating. And even though the locals have uh, changed some of their blue zone habits, still they're still doing quite well. They're still doing very well compared to us in America and Canada, especially in Mexico, where you're from. When they are living the closer to their traditional ways, they're still doing way, way, way better. And yeah, they're not eating the fruits for breakfast or anything like that, fruits and vegetables for breakfast. But they are eating breakfast. No fail. They always eat breakfast. And as far as I can tell, most or all the blue zones do also eat breakfast, do eat at least 3 times a day, most of them, unless it's a religious festival, or they'll have a certain week or month or day that they fast on. But other than that, as far as I can tell, they are eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Unless there's some kind of hardship, the crops aren't coming in yet, or it's late in the season or something, and they have to ration food a little bit. If they have the choice, they will eat 3 times a day.
Which is very interesting, it's like yeah, well, they'll give, I mean, they have to sell, right? So they'll sell what works from people coming in, but they're not doing it and they're doing good.
Mm-hmm.
So you even think about the foods. Well, I am not a fan of rice and beans at all, but I can see also that, for example, well, they eat some fish, so they are eating certain they're getting their essential um, amino acids, but they aren't eating so much of them like methionine or leucine or isoleucine, and which are also linked to lower longevity, so in a certain way, well, it's like, okay, so the quantities are important as well.
And the rice
And
and beans is small portions, by the way. They're not huge
oh,
plates.
okay. Yeah, yeah, because the portion there will be important.
And
Is
they're
it white
pinto
white
beans.
rice?
It's right,
Pinto.
white rice, but pinto beans also seem to be one of the less problematic beans.
Hmm.
And it's just a sprinkle of beans too. Especially in
Hmm.
South America, they just have a little sprinkle of beans. Whereas you go up to Mexico and they have a dish that's like all beans. It's
Yeah.
the quantity is way different. There are Indian people as well. They have tons of beans, tons of lentils. But yeah, down in Costa Rica and stuff, it's just a little sprinkle of pinto beans on it. It's not a lot.
What do they cook with? Like what oils or fats?
Now they probably do cook with cooking oil. I was there before I really got into all this health stuff, so I wasn't paying that close of attention.
Hmm.
I know they do cook with butter a lot as well. I should mention they have eggs too. They got chickens running around the village. And this isn't
Hmm.
every part of Nicoya. This is just the village that I'm in. I'm pretty sure it's quite similar. They all have the same basics. You get rice and beans as street food out there, basically. And they all
Yeah.
make the tortillas the same way. They all have eggs. They all have chickens. They do eat fish. Yes, we were on the ocean. I should mention as well that their cows, the species of cows they have there, they're skinny. They're not fat cows like us.
Mm.
You know, their meat is not marbled, and they don't eat the meat very often because they want to keep the cows alive. They rely on that cheese. That cheese is a huge part of their diet. Everybody in the village, if they're super poor or not, it doesn't matter. They're eating that cheese every day. It's backbone of their diet. But
Oh,
the
well,
cows are way more healthy. The cows are not given growth hormone or antibiotics or anything like that. They're just allowed to forage, and they are skinny cows. And yeah, they don't have many meat cows. They'll only kill the cow once it stops producing milk or something like that. Or if it's a male, they'll let it grow up a year or two, then kill it. You know, keep the females around. And they don't have huge flocks here. They don't have a lot of land. This is jungle, right? They don't have fields, so they can only maintain a few cows, not a lot of cows. No
right.
goats, although I'm sure people do have goats out there. I didn't see any goats or anything like that. They weren't eating any bush meat or anything like that. Just a pretty small variety of foods, honestly.
And dairy being, raw dairy, right? Unpasteurized,
Hmm.
unpasteurized cheese.
Yeah.
So yeah, way more natural. Um, and also I was just writing about this because a vegan came out and started like, like it's very much like a religion now, like a belief, it's like, oh, you don't need any of that. And then they send me a study with research, and it's like the same research contradicting, saying like, oh, you can live through veganism, you don't need anything else. And another side, oh yeah, but you need to fortify your foods with B12 and other nutrients. So then you can't, right? They're saying actually you can't. So they just contradict themselves. And I was like, oh yeah, well, we come off the mammary gland, the breast milk, and we are more bioavailable, meaning we absorb more of what we're supposed to be eating. And when it comes from milk, a derivative like cheese, well, we absorb it in general a lot better, right? So yeah, it just makes sense. Like eating dairy, having these ancient customs and still doing them, and just not going overboard with the quantities, because we know about the topic of eating a lot of meat but not enough calcium. But
Hmm.
were we eating that much meat before? You know?
No, 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 it wouldn't have been. And don't get me wrong, these people in Costa Rica, if you gave them, if you handed out T-bone steaks to everyone, they would eat them. You know, there's no problem eating them. It's just, yeah, they live still under relative scarcity, quite relative scarcity compared to us. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have jobs. Most of them don't have jobs. So they can't sustain a lot of cows out there anyways. You know, if the country increased its meat consumption big time, they'd need to import all this stuff because most of the country is jungle. It just can't handle. You'd have to tear it down like the Amazon to grow for cows for
And
grazing.
the
But yeah,
cheese and the cows are going to have a good omega 3 to 6 ratio. Why?
because they're not that fat.
Yeah, because they're not eating grains, which have that ratio. Have
Hmm.
you ever checked the omega 3 6 ratio in grass? It's 1 to 1. I have never read this, but one day I was curious. I'm like, huh, okay, so grass fed. Well, what does the grass have? Let's see the fatty acids. And I'm like, they're 1 to 1. So it gets closer to, where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, one to one's where we want to be at. If anyone is wondering, 3 to 6, 1 to 1, that's what we want. There's very little disagreement about that. And there's very little disagreement about the fact that we eat between 10 and 20 times too much omega 6, which in that case, it's inflammatory. If you have too much omega 6 becomes inflammatory, even though
And
it's
I
essential.
I bet you they're not checking the differentiation between omega 6 that's coming from a cow, or natural grass-fed cow, or even the other cow, towards omega 6 from oils, which is probably also pairing in with plant sterols, the wrong form of cholesterol. They're probably also oxidized, and then we're getting an inflammatory response. I mean, no, how many people really think about that and check that? I mean, there are a lot of parameters to measure, or a lot of controls for a study like that. So, would it be the same even if we're eating? Would those omega 6? It's just like a question to throw out there. Would those omega 6 be the same, pro-inflammatory, if it comes from an animal, healthy animal source, or from a plant? You know,
Well, I
so
think you hit it on the head with the oxidation factor. I think that's the key factor there. And omega 6s are anti-inflammatory as well. Like this is where it gets really confusing because omega 6s can be anti-inflammatory depending on the study and what they're looking at, what the parameters are. But so I think that's explained by When the ratio is extremely off, then it's no longer anti-inflammatory. Both of them are anti-inflammatory, omega-3 and 6, when in the proper ratios. But when that ratio is thrown off or when it's oxidized, then it is pro-inflammatory.
Yeah. So there's this important aspect of, okay, when we go orthomolecular, we go really into the form of molecule and we have to know where it's from. But also it's like, okay, so is it from animal? Is it from vegetable? Plants? Where is it from? How long, has it been out there? Is it oxidizing or not? But, what's the origin? So we would have never ever found seed oils out there or vegetable oils. That would be impossible in those ratios, those amounts for cooking and for adding to it would be impossible.
Mm-hmm.
However, we would find it from dairy, and milk, and because we were born into that, we would breastfeeding, that's what it's about, right? So we didn't start off being vegans at all. I mean, that's impossible, right? Or just give them green smoothies, through a tube or something to babies. Let's see if they survive, you know? Um, but in any case, so even the ratios, the type of omegas, the source of them are important because we really start drilling down to like omega-6, yeah. But we don't go back to say like we aren't really like eating omega-3s and 6. We're eating foods. And from there, sometimes we can separate certain parts, but we always have to take it from a food, right? We have to get it from somewhere. So where is it coming from? Blue Zone, they're doing good. Scarcity, like I said, was more of the typical, you know, not overabundance, and they're living longer. So I mean, we just start linking these like, okay, fasting, not eating so much, sometimes eating more, sometimes eating less, not being like too rigid on eat this much for this long and go through the calories thing that's very useless. It can be useful to a certain degree, but not really much. Um,
What do you mean, calorie?
yeah, like calories, like saying, okay, so for example, it's if we consider try and think about everything in nutrition as calories, then a Coca-Cola is going to be the same as an apple. It's like, oh, it's the same thing because we're just thinking about calories, right? So is there a utility there? Well, no, absolutely not. But it's useful for the big food industry, right? Which will lead to big pharma getting some gain there and big sports selling their stuff and ideas. So you lose weight. All these, they start, it's like a big industry thing, right? Um, as opposed to saying like, okay, is it really just calories or is it types of foods? Like, yeah, is it that we're eating red animal meat or eggs? Does it really matter if, I mean, we could go way more calories potential because it's not like we're using them up, right? As well, where it takes resources to transform all those things. So the calorie approach of, yeah, just eat these calories and that'll be enough. That's not really nutrition. That's not nutrition at all. Maybe it's like, okay, we would require a certain amount of caloric intake in theory, we're not considering our own fat, our own glycogen. We're not considering how effective we are in using it. We don't really know. Nobody knows. We can have kind of like estimates, like physiological ranges, but it's still a range. It's not like everyone has to have these 3,000 calories or everyone needs this amount of methionine or branched chain amino acids. Well, no. I mean, if you're having a lot of tissue breakdown in muscles and bone and well, then you'll need more to rebuild. Definitely, right? You need higher amounts. But is that a calorie thing? What is it really useful to think about calories in that aspect? How useful is it? I don't know if I'm or what you understand or
Well, you
from
touched on something important there. The calories that you consume are not necessarily the calories that your body uses or stores or metabolizes or absorbs or digests, right? You can eat tons and tons of calories, like those skinny people we were talking about earlier, eating tons and tons of calories. And clearly, it's not being metabolized, it's not being assimilated into the body. Most of it's just passing right through because it's not being absorbed. I think enzyme deficiency is going to be a factor here as well. You know, we've talked about this before where almost everybody's eating almost all cooked foods almost all the time, which means the enzymes are dead in it. You need enzymes to digest food and to absorb nutrients and to do everything in the body, basically. So when you're enzyme deficient in general, the pancreas is going to produce as much as it can, but there's no way it can produce enough enzymes to digest 6,000 calories, for example, or something like that. So anybody who's eating a lot of food, I think we should just assume that a lot of it is not being absorbed in general. And on the other side of the coin, you've got people who are on starvation diets and are unable to lose weight. Some of them can gain weight and they're under 1,000 calories a day. So calories in does not equal calories out or does not equal absorption. And with that 1,000 calories, you know, if you don't have the nutrients and enzymes that you need to run your metabolism, then it's not going to matter. You're going to feel the effects of starvation without actually losing the weight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, totally. And just thinking that everything is chemical and everything is nutrition based, you know? So in a way we can tie this into the like intermittent fasting. Like if you fast, your cells will be able to clear out, waste molecules, they'll take out the trash so there's space to bring in the new, right? They'll become more efficient. So you go into this rhythmic dance of eating, not eating, opening up the window, sometimes closing down the eating window. It'll be useful if you do it that way, right? You'll become more efficient in energy creation, in calorie usage and transformation, because there are no calories. It's all metabolism. It's just like all these steps in transforming, releasing energy, right? That's on the nutritional and metabolic aspect. But we get energy from thermal energy, mid infrared energy, transforming our body water into easy water called exclusion zone water, which pretty much changes the structure into structured water. And once it is changed back into normal, like tap water, energy is released. So there have been a lot of studies done on like birds flying and everything to like say like it is impossible for these long flights to be happening with how much they ate, even with the aerodynamics and everything. There's something else. So we also like the blue zones, like in Costa Rica. Well, the temperature is in those ranges. There's thermal energy which you can use. I mean, there's a lot of study on structured water. I don't know, for example, you like hydrogen water. I don't know how much of that is also like when you drink it, it's released into your body, because there must be a charge, right? Because of the hydrogen,
Mhm.
or it's having an impact on your pH, maybe. I don't know. I really haven't like researchers studied up on that, but in any case, it doesn't just come from food. That's kind of like what I want to point towards. So the food aspect important, the rhythm. It's not the same as eating the same amount of calories and amount of food, in the same time window as it is to eat in less amounts, like a 70% typical diet, like restriction diet, as to eating more of those calories or nutrients in a day and then not eating one day and then eating again. It's way more efficient to do it that way, you know? So then it kind of like starts pointing into the rhythm thing again of, okay, what's a little bit healthier? So is it just like always the 3 times per day or sometimes? But why would they change it that much in a blue zone when it's pretty much always warm in that part? It's always there are no
They don't
seasons.
have a winter, yeah.
Yeah, there's no winter there. It's pretty much the same thing
They
as
got a
opposed to
rainy
us.
season, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel hunger in the winter for sure. And so while we're circling around this subject of when to eat, you mentioned earlier exercise on an empty stomach, and you said you used to feel good doing it, and now not so much. Is that correct?
Well, I did it for several months. I mean, I even studied up on, I was testing myself, even fasting mimicking diets, blood glucose, blood ketones, acetone in breath. blood pulse pressure. I would use medical grade equipment for that. So I was really checking different biological parameters, not just body mass index, but body composition. Um, um, so I used all these different machines. I would be noticing how I felt, and for a while it was really good. Then you start losing some weight. Then you start, and eventually you can't do it that much. So fasting for how long? Again, if you start losing a lot of weight, then you should, you know, open up your eating window, open up to certain foods. That's why my nutritional program, it doesn't go into like just eat this forever. It's like we start in certain phases and then you switch to a second phase and a third phase, but it depends on where you're at that moment. So you can gain metabolic flexibility and use different energy sources, right? To where you're ready. For example, on another podcast, we could eventually talk about the heavy metal detox and why it's like such a nightmare for so many people, you know, and how to do it the right way. But it comes hand in hand. So you want to be able to use up all those nutrients and gain weight and muscle because it's not just fat you're gaining if you do it with, the proper nutrients. So you're not in that part of such low resilience, as in every single small stressor can give you a panic attack and cause a lot of stress, make you irritated, grumpy, hangry,
Mhm.
And if you're on the other side, well, how can you get more energy? How can you like start shifting into like more of this middle and have a range to like be versatile, just not like stuck. So I can't really give a flat response to, okay, always eat this and always eat, right? So you said, oh, well, they would feast and they would eat more types of foods. Well, yeah, that's the feasting fasting dance. You feast, you fast. This is known cultural. This is even like set into religious practices because it's also the structural building, exoteric side of certain religions to like, okay, so there's utility in not eating, and sometimes there isn't enough food, so let's fast.
I know a lot of people get caught in routine, both men and women. A lot of our customers and clients are very, very stuck in doing the same thing every day. And I'm guilty of this as well. It's hard for me to break routine. It's been hard for me to get on breakfast. I've been trying to get on breakfast. It's hard to do. It's hard to change your habits. But yeah, you're saying that this is seasonal, this is cyclical, this is, depending on where you're at in life, like older people might not need to eat as much. Maybe that's not even correct. Maybe
Great
it's
point.
just because they're lacking in enzymes. They produce less enzymes and less stomach acid when they get older. So often they feel like eating less. Maybe they do just need as much food, but definitely it's obvious in children, babies, teenagers, they can eat all day, and they should. I would say they should be eating more, they should be sleeping more, they should be having more nutrients because you need more nutrients to build tissues than you do to maintain them. So earlier in life, you should be eating more. Of course, if you're pregnant or menstruating, like even Muslims doing Ramadan, right, the month-long fast where they don't eat during the day, uh, sun up to sundown, they don't eat. When women are menstruating, most Muslim women will stop the fast at that point. They know that it's not healthy. It will crash them down. With this exercising on an empty stomach thing, you said you felt better for a while and then you didn't. For me, being healthy right now, even on one meal a day, I know, like I said, I know it's not optimal, but I feel very good overall. I do. I just know that I probably will feel even better if I add another meal in there. But I feel like I can jump up and do anything at any time. It's not really a huge deal whether I have food in my stomach or not, just because I'm healthy, which is good. You're ready for action anytime. But I like to do my intellectual work, my brain work on an empty stomach for the most part. I try and get almost all the brain work done in the morning. I'm talking about emails and customer calls and stuff that I really need to think about. To me, it's better to get it done before I eat. But I used to be able to go out and do physical activity on an empty stomach, and now I don't. I don't like to do that. The closest thing to vigorous exercise that I get is spray painting, which, believe it or not, is pretty physically intense to me, makes me sore and tired. And I do not like to go out before our meal. lunch, we call it. We do our one meal at lunchtime. I do not like to go out painting unless we've had lunch.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, in the morning, you have this surge because you have your natural circadian rhythm, right, with the sun.
Hmm.
So you get a surge and you're really still using up glycogen and maybe some fat, and that's when you feel like really acute mental like focus and everything. So yeah, I love that boost. It's really good, but in the long term, then that's where you can see like, okay, so for how long? I'm still younger, but when I'm older, will this still apply as much or, so it's like taking a little bit more of that long perspective. I've done it again for months to a year and then shifted. But after a while, I was like, huh, now I'm feeling more tired. I'm doing the same things. I would usually control it as if I were an experiment.
Hmm.
So I would be like, okay, so nothing here has changed, even within the season. So what's going on? So yeah, I mean, it feels good in the beginning. That's when they say like, "Oh, I just went vegetarian. I'm feeling really good." Yeah, because you're off a lot of certain foods. But it also depends. You're going like pure pastas, and you can be vegetarian and eat Fruit Loops all day, with
Hmm.
I don't know, like oat milk, and you'll have so many issues. But really, eventually, leading into doing it constantly in the morning, working out, feeling good makes you do even more, and that's where we don't measure because we kind of like feel so good and we're feeling the even euphoria like, I'm getting so much done and I can think so much and read so much, and then you do more and then you start wearing yourself out. So there's like these unintended consequences. um but yeah, I just remembered I started feeling, not that good, and Dave Asprey goes into this. He's like, yeah, you start getting like insulin resistance and you start, um, so it's more of a cyclical thing. Everything I've read goes more into that. Everything in nature is cyclical. There is no firm thing. There are no lines. There are no even energy. It has its up and down.
Hmm.
It is not a straight line. Energy is not a straight line. It's up and down and up and down and up and down. So why would this be different? So I think you said it very well when we're like creatures of habit, habituate, becomes familiar. We start like setting into that. So when we set into an idea of eating like 5 times a day and we do it for a long time, we start getting issues. When we get into an idea and probably eating just one, I mean, you still feel good. You're on nutrients, you're doing a lot of good stuff, right? However, who knows if, I mean, we'd have to wait, in my opinion. Yeah, it isn't optimal for several reasons. But like I said, I already kind of like went through that or fasted several days. And when you start doing it more frequent, then there's like you really have to listen to your body. That's also a key message. All the studies in the world can't really take in all these factors. They don't look at the seasons. They're not going to look into all the nutrients you have in food. They'll say, let's give you chicken, and they'll assume that every single piece of chicken is just going to have the same things, which it will not.
Yeah, no, it's
And
definitely not.
there's just no way to see it. But we can look back and say, like, okay, so ancestors, people that have lived long, where are they? What were their customs? And we can take that and say, like, okay, we've got a little bit of this picture and say, like, okay, so why don't we try it, see how we feel, understand that it's not just like fasting is good, like a pure check mark.
It's not
It's
just
like
yes or no. Yeah.
just not yes or no. It's like when, why do you want to fast? Do you want to fast when you're really skinny and don't have, well, good luck with that. You'll probably be throwing up within the 24-hour fast. I've seen it, so it's like just be flexible and listen to your body. I say that all the time. Like listen and don't get like also like hyper fixated on this is great and just stick with it forever, you know?
So I know a lot of people listening are into fasting, they believe in the benefits of fasting, and I believe in the benefits too. The benefits are truly there, especially for, resetting your system overall, resetting your cravings. Do a good 2, 3, 5 day fast. You're going to have a major adjustment in how you think about food. You probably won't be eating as much comfort food and all that stuff. Your portions will probably decrease very, very quickly because once you return to food, you won't be able to eat that much. This is a big problem. Many people do eat way too much food, total quantity, regardless of when they eat it during the day. One big meal or 8 meals throughout the day. Just the average American, Canadian, Australian, English, British person eat way too much total food. I think we can agree on that. And
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I'm fasting right now. As I mentioned, we have not eaten yet today. So I'm well over 12 hours not eating. I'm probably 18, close to 24 hours of not eating yet. And I know that if I were to continue, like just didn't eat today, didn't eat tomorrow, I know that I would be more or less fine. It becomes easier as you get on to day 2, 3, 4. It becomes easier to not eat. I know I can easily do 2, 3, 4 days without eating. Basically, no problem. I don't have to stress about it at all. Or if I'm on the road or something, like it takes me 3, 4 days to drive to Texas from here. I know I can live on a handful of dates that whole time. I will not stop at a restaurant or anything like that. But it's not something I want to do every day. I know it's something I'm capable of doing, and it will, of course, give the body the ability, the time, the opportunity to clear itself out, do the housekeeping that it needs to because it's not focused on digestion now. It can do other things in the body. And that's all well and good. But today, right now, I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm getting tired. It's only 2:30 p.m. here. I'm feeling tired because I haven't eaten yet. I'm getting a little bit grouchy. I'm feeling the blood sugar drop, basically. I know that. And if I kept going another 2, 3 days, it would probably even itself out, but it's not something I want to do every day. It's not. I know I will feel better after I eat today, and I do think that I would do better eating smaller portions throughout the day. I'd like you to get into a little bit more about why intermittent fasting isn't the best. And before you do that, I just want to throw something on the table here. I've read a couple of books that recommend a handful of books that recommend the opposite of intermittent fasting. They recommend intermittent eating, eating 6 to 8 times a day, small meals, small portions, grazing, basically. And even us, we've said that grazing isn't optimal. Dr. Wallach has said that grazing isn't optimal. But I'm strongly, strongly rethinking this because when I read this book, it's called Hypoglycemia, A Better Approach. It's a bit of an old book here. I think it's from the 70s or 60s. It's by Pavo Erola, who's kind of semi-famous in the alternative health world, at least in the older books. A lot of people reference him. And
Mhm.
this book was talking about how quite often high protein diets fail. And back in the 60s and continuing to today, a lot of mainstream medical doctors will recommend basically a high protein diet. If you have a blood sugar problem, they'll recommend a high protein diet. And that makes some bit of sense because diabetics, of course, usually they are eating way too much carbs. That's one of their major problems, carbs and sugar. So if you swap that out and eat more protein and fat, that's our general diet advice, anyways. Don't go full keto, you don't need to, but you do want to replace carbs and sugar with protein and fat, especially processed carbs and sugar. And in general, that works quite well. But there are a lot of people that I've seen and that show up in these books who did terribly on a high protein diet. Don't know if you've got an opinion on this, but this book, Hypoglycemia, A Better Approach, actually recommended intermittent eating 6 to 8 meals a day and relatively high carbs, natural carbs, of course, not, processed
Mhm.
cane sugar, but things like potatoes and fruits and stuff. And it's not a low carb diet, basically. I've seen just as many people do terribly on a low carb diet as I have a low protein diet. Some people very obviously need more protein, and I often recommend they eat more protein. But, you know, this idea that we got to get completely off of carbs and that we've got to intermittent fast seems to be a bit tangled up. I guess the real question is this, if rather than cutting out these things to the extreme and even cutting the eating down to the extreme range, do you think it's really just a matter of a better balance? Like that's pretty much what this hypoglycemia diet is. It's just, you're still getting protein and fat. It's just a little bit more balanced with carbs and you're just eating more frequently.
Well, I think it's a little bit more towards what you're saying, for the partial answer, as opposed to just like eat 6 to 8 times a day, which I would totally disagree with. But it also does depend. I mean, what are you eating 6 to 8 times a day? Are you eating, like you said, like a lot of protein, or are you eating nuts and seeds, or are you eating dried food? What, like dried fruit, which really also can spike your blood sugar a lot.
Mhm.
What are you eating? It's like, yeah, just so at least until now, all the studies as well as in general is like we would eat 3 times a day, then we ate 5 times a day, and then we've got more diabetes and we've got more overweight. And so the more we eat, the more insulin response, the more it has to be transformed into reserves or energy at the moment. If you're sitting down and you're eating, well, it will go into reserves and you'll feel fatigued and lethargic and, a bunch of things because you're using all your energy for that, right? Are you eating fructose or are you eating glucose? Fructose and glucose are very different. Fructose will drain you like that. There's just the body's made that way.
Because
High
it'll cause
glucose,
a rapid spike and then a rapid drop.
no, there's actually the metabolic pathways really shift into like eating fructose into like a freight train of it takes priority and it actually leaves you depleted in ATP and energy as opposed to glucose. So fructose is very different. And right now, what is being added in general is high fructose corn syrup and these other forms, which make it even worse.
Mhm.
So yeah, people can, functional doctors can debate as, okay, so a fruit, if you eat it completely, it isn't that bad. It's released a little bit slower to your bloodstream. But in any case, an avocado is not a pineapple. you know so which fruit are we talking about? So again, eating 6 times a day fruit or eight, really bad idea. Small amounts, well, the amount will impact, but you're getting the spikes again and again depending on the food. It's not the same if you're drinking a ketone drink you know as opposed to something with glucose. So if you were doing that, well, then you're not going to have those spikes. You'll probably get an interesting effect. I'm actually testing that out. It's been very interesting. um, but I wouldn't go for it because, like I said, again, we're more towards we eat more of an amount, more of an animal source foods, like a wolf. We're not there yet, but we're not like, because we're hunters. We're no, we have evolved into that as opposed to just being in a tree like other monkeys and taking fruit and eating all day. That's what they do.
A lot of
They're
animals will eat all day.
yeah, they're just eating, they're just eating all day. But I mean, are we?
Well, they
You
also don't
know,
have impressive lifespans at all.
well, no, it really does depend. Impressive. We'd have to compare ourselves to something else. But if you compare all animals to plants, well, plants will live a lot longer. But we would just be giving value to uh, living longer being like something very important, right? Well, live longer for what? Why do you want to live so long? I mean, it may be fun, maybe not. I don't know, but is it really that important? Or is it more important to live a healthy, functional life the time you have? It's like they usually go hand in hand, yes. But in any case, when it comes to okay, certain patterns, eating 8 times a day, I wouldn't go for that because of our species where we fit in the first place. But I would say, like I said, sometimes you can eat 2 times, sometimes 3 times. If someone's working a lot, thinking a lot right now, you start getting tired and you can start getting grumpy because it depends on performance. That would be more of my answer.
So higher
It depends.
performance, you need more food too.
High performance, you need more food. More thinking, high performance, you need more food.
So what do you think would be the simplest answer if somebody asked you, Yannick, as simply as you possibly can explain it, why is intermittent fasting not good or not optimal?
Well, it is good sometimes. That would be my answer because sometimes you can be worn out. Sometimes you'll have high stress. Why do you want to add to your stress load? Is it important or is it just an idea seeking health and actually doing the contrary because you're trying to
Adding
seek health?
adding stress by not eating, you're calling that's a stressor on the
Yeah,
body.
it's a strong activator. It's a stressor. right? You're going to use internal resources to be able to continue performing, doing stuff, thinking, feeling. Feeling isn't for free. Thinking isn't for free either.
Hmm.
So if you have this, a lot of work, you're really stressed out, you're having social issues, and then it's like, oh, and now I also have to, and you're getting hungry because you're low on on blood sugar, and why would you fast?
Fair enough.
No, so so it can be useful, yes, if you have the time, you're taking care of your health, yes. Do it all the time? Go into that habit? No. I would say no. That is not healthy. Play with it, learn from it. Don't just take what we're saying for granted. Go into it, experiment. That would be my advice and see how you feel. We've just been doing it more carefully, experimentally, and really, so people can have a little bit more, information and they don't have to go through the entire process. But I wouldn't just say like, yeah, fast forever. Like nobody can fast forever. Depends. It's situational.
So
Have
just
more
because you
stress.
see research saying that intermittent fasting can improve this or that or help you lose weight, just don't take it as gospel. We shouldn't do the same thing every day, probably, unless you have an extremely rigid, regimented life where you literally do the same thing every day. Even still, you're still going to change over time. Your circadian rhythm's going to change over time. And yeah, someone like me who doesn't do a lot of moving, I sit in a chair for a living. I don't feel like I need to eat that much. Days that I am very active, like I go out spray painting or something, I'm hungrier. I do feel like I need to eat more food. So you're saying just pay attention to it. Pay attention to your cycles and what you actually need.
Yeah. I mean, because you can see that study. And would it be the same as someone living in Siberia as someone living in Costa Rica? you
They
know?
have very different energy demands. Let
Yeah.
me put another thing on the table here. When when you're stressed and when you're in fight or flight mode, which doesn't mean you're literally running away from something. It could just be like you're on the bus and you're stressed out about being claustrophobic or something. Anytime that you're in fight or flight mode, your
Yeah.
adrenals produce cortisol. And one of the effects of cortisol is that it stimulates your body to release more glucose. Like we said that you get glucose from food as well. Your body takes basically all food and turns it into glucose, and then insulin is released to metabolize the glucose and stuff. But your body will do this as well, just with the adrenals. And so this in our as we're kind of wrapping this podcast up here, I think this might be the most important thing is sleep. You mentioned it earlier. So your circadian rhythm and sleep. Because right now in the modern world, almost everybody's staying up too late, way too unnaturally late. And you also mentioned that a lot of them are doing a lot of their eating later in the day as well. Like when we're already supposed to be in bed, the sun's been down for a couple hours, we're supposed to be sleeping. People are getting in lots and lots of food at that time, lots of snacks, lots of high calorie food, lots of processed carbs like alcohol and snacks and stuff like that. A lot of people, their cravings really, really come in full force at night. And I think a big part of that reason is because of their circadian rhythms thrown off and because their adrenals are constantly overworking and constantly kind of relying on that as your overall energy state. Maybe there's a better way to explain that, but we should all understand that we have two different sets of hormones. We've got sleep hormones, we've got wake up hormones. And if you don't wake up with the sun, or you're like me way up north here in the winter, it's very, very dark. Well, what's going to be impeded is your pituitary releasing wake up hormones, basically. But the easier one to throw off, I think, and maybe even the more important one, is if you don't go to sleep basically at dusk when the sun goes down, you should be starting to go to sleep. You should be winding down, not watching Netflix, not scrolling on the phone, not having conversations, not all the stressful stuff that we do at night. This should be the time where you're winding down, going to bed, because now you're producing melatonin. Melatonin is not only a sleep hormone, it's also a powerful antioxidant. So it's part of how your body actually repairs itself at night, repairs, restores itself at night. And it's very, very easy to throw that off. So I'm imagining it's got to be like 90% of people that have thrown off their circadian rhythm by doing this, by staying up too late, by watching blue screens at night, and having too much sugar throughout the day in general, too much sugar in general, but especially At night, I think this is totally thrown off their metabolism. So I don't know if you agree with this, but to me, regulating your circadian rhythm, waking up early in the morning, going to bed at a reasonable time is far more important than intermittent fasting or eating 6 times a day. It's way more important than actually I think the quantity of food that you're eating, calories that you're eating, the times that you're eating. And if you're trying to lose weight with any of these diets, especially if you're not gaining success, it probably is because your metabolism's off, because your circadian rhythm is off, which go hand in hand. These hormones, like the pituitary, for example, the pituitary hormones that are released in the morning are very intimately linked to the other hormones that your body is going to produce throughout the day. Like they call it the PTA, is it called? The PTA, pituitary, they call it the HPA, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, where your pituitary glands have a lot to do with telling your other glands what to do, right? All these, the pituitary glands in your head, behind your eyes, so is the pineal gland that creates the melatonin. Well, the pituitary is often called the master gland because if that's thrown off, it's not telling your thyroid lower down, your hypothalamus. It's not telling these things to produce their hormones properly, and so this can throw off your entire hormone system, including the hormones that regulate our appetite, like ghrelin, right? A lot of this stuff isn't produced or is produced improperly or in too high of amounts if your pituitary, hypothalamic pituitary axis is off.
Yeah. Well, I would very strongly agree with you. Sleep, extremely important. You've got in the day wear and tear. When you sleep, you regenerate, right? So, regardless of the idea of calories, you still need the building blocks and, metabolizers, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and, all these different um, of forms so you can rebuild. So, yeah, they go hand in hand. But if you don't have enough time to sleep, it'll throw you off. You can't use up all that material. If you eat late, I think eating late is actually one of the worst problems. Then your body's going to be filled with, it's still going to have the hormones that are supposed to be, we're going to use in the day, cortisol, right? We're going to have higher levels of cortisol, which means go out, do things, wear and tear, as opposed to melatonin, right? Which is it's an antioxidant and like signaling molecules to shut down and repair. You get colder, you eat, you'll get warmer.
Mhm.
We have to get colder to be more efficient in sleeping. So sleep is really important.
That's an
But when
interesting thing, hey? That we do get colder when we sleep, and so when you eat before bed, you're actually warming your body up, especially if it's sugar or alcohol or something like that. So that can
yeah,
cause you to have a more poor sleep, which will already be thrown off if your circadian's off and you're going to sleep at midnight or something like that. It's just by default, you're not going to get that restorative of a sleep. So you're saying by increasing your body temperature before eating, that can throw off the sleep even further.
yeah. So sleep is the other side. It's the yin and the yang, awake, asleep, sun, moon,
Mhm.
day, night. So barely any attention is paid towards sleeping and improving sleeping. They just have like these ideas, the REM sleep, and it's like they're just like kind of like describing things, but really not going into the why we sleep and how to really improve. They kind of like study into like sleep hygiene a little bit more, like okay, like your environment and what to change and everything. But they really don't go that much into okay, so why we sleep, what are the conditions, what would be the natural conditions to have better sleep, and how long. So you mentioned before, younger people and teenagers, they need more sleep, but they're not, they're actually, people have this idea like, oh, they should go into sports because exercise is good just because it's good.
Mhm.
Exercise being 4 hours, 5 hours is the same as what they don't think about that. It's like, oh, socially it'll be better to go, so they go to soccer practice, and after all the extenuous schooling, then they go into these different practices and they're like, oh, they're having temper tantrums and they can't concentrate, they're dehydrated, they don't have energy. I'm like, Are they eating anything before practice? Are they drinking water and salt during practice? Are they, nothing. So if you consider that, there's not enough time to sleep, repair, grow. You need more time to grow, more time to repair. There's also a time thing. So sleep is definitely a critical. It's the other side, which is the most commonly there's barely any attention into sleep, and it is completely critical. You won't be as hungry. You won't crave for certain foods. You just know it when you sleep good and
Things
when you don't
change,
sleep
yeah, when
good.
you sleep better. You said earlier that we're basically meant to feel guilty. We're like we're lazy, we're a loser for oversleeping. And yet I've really tried to force myself to sleep more because this used to affect me as well. I feel like, oh well, I'm not a billionaire here. I guess I'm supposed to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and crush it all day and work until 1 a.m. and just be tired. I don't need that much sleep. You suck it up, be a man, all this stuff. This hustle
Yeah.
culture is really, really affecting a lot of people, including myself, but I've backed away from that big time. I'm still just as productive, if not more productive. I think better, I feel better. I get tons of work done. If you do a little bit of work every day, it's going to add up to a lot. But yeah, I used to stay up later, wake up earlier, and feel extremely guilty. If I woke up past 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m., I would feel very, very guilty. And that guilt itself is a form of stress, a form of self-harm, I would go as far as to say. And I think we should relax a little bit more and sleep. Well, relax a lot more and sleep a lot more.
Yeah.
You'll get better work done anyways. You'll get your best inspiration when you're like in the shower, right? Or getting ready for bed. A lot of people have reported they've had this amazing breakthrough idea when they finally let go of it. They gave up even like, oh, okay, I can't find the answer to this. And they just gave up and relaxed, went on doing something else. Boom, the answer finally hits them. And for me,
Happened to me too.
it's always it's in the shower, it's at the end of the day, it's when I've stopped thinking about what I'm supposed to be thinking about that the inspiration actually comes, or the answer actually comes, or the idea, whatever it is, plan comes together when I'm not thinking about it. So we spend so much time turned on for this hustle thing that we don't have time to reflect or actually get the ideas that we need to move forward. I don't know, maybe I'm going a little bit too deep here, but I found the
I
kind
think
of
you're
running
spot
on
on.
on autopilot, right? I'm in this hustle mode and I'm kind of on autopilot. I'm just doing the same actions over and over and over, and they're working to a degree, but I never gave myself that time to sit back, think, reflect, come up with a new plan, evaluate what's going on. I don't know. It's just once you pull away from all that and stop thinking, that's when the answer tends to come.
Yeah, well, how can you receive if you're thinking, talking to yourself, giving out? How can you be receptive
You
to
can't
new
you can't
things?
do two
You
things at
can't,
once. You can't read and listen at once.
right? So that's where actually the best approaches that are really useful are like Zen Buddhism, like don't think as much, empty your cup, um, all these different approaches, which is lifestyle, mental hygiene, I call it, not, it's like, how about we go less into um, just awareness and um, mindfulness, and let's go into mind emptiness, you know?
Hmm.
That, I mean, it's always filled up. So how will we be inspired if we're not really enjoying stuff or feeling what's coming towards us? We're just lashing out or like throwing it all out there. So sleeping more, shutting down, that's critical. If you want to have a functional HPA axis, um, which is really just a way of describing how something happens, but it really doesn't tell you anything about why it's happening. So you really want to be in a good place? Well, that's where lifestyle nutrition can't get into that. Nutrition can help you so you're not really active at night and you can start, like not using up things like eating late, eating processed foods and stuff like that late. Well, it'll just really affect you. Um, However, you still need a different recognized way of life, lifestyle. That's where lifestyle kicks in, and that's why it's so important.
Hmm.
So, lifestyle being critical here as opposed to the guilt trip, because I mean, don't sleep. So this is the same message that is sent to medical doctors in the United States and several places, like sleep deprivation. Everyone
Yeah,
knows
work
sleep
3 days straight
It's insane.
and then do heart surgery.
And then why do so many people die in hospitals? Why are there so many medical errors? Well, also sleep deprivation has to do with it too. In Sweden, they don't have this type of issue. They sleep a lot more. I mean, they are awake for long periods, but it's not like the sleep deprivation. The guy that even did this was a cocaine addict. So
What do you
he
mean?
pre yeah, yeah. One of the doctors that started with all this, programs for the interns that to become doctors, he was a cocaine addict. I don't remember his name. I just remember I studied that in a few books, and it was like, oh, just like keep on doing things, and that's when you're productive. To be able to produce, you have to not produce. It's like a dance. You eat, you don't eat. You wear and tear, you have to repair. The more you repair, the better you'll be at doing stuff. So the time is really important. Sleeping is really important. The guilt, reprogramming or even forgetting these ideas, the guilt trip is really important, because if not, then you feel bad. You can have two sources for energy: a pleasurable one, like, oh, this is rewarding, this feels good, or you'll have a punishment guilt one, which guilt can only be born from social. And the ego, this representation of yourself, is a social convention. So whatever is in that list, it'll keep you from sleeping, it'll keep you from repairing yourself, it'll keep you from taking it easy. If you only if think about you're thinking all the time, you can only think about thoughts. You will always be stuck in the past and projecting a future, and you miss out on the present, which is very typical in Oriental philosophy. Some aspects of esoteric Christian side of it, you know, in religions. So we have lost myth to really set us into what, how to really know where we're at and how to place ourselves depending on which age. We're not the same in 20s as we are in the 40s. We don't feel the same. We don't have enough energy, as much energy. We're not as motivated. We're not just trying to, find a place for ourselves.
Mhm.
So it has to do with the moment in time of your life. We start really going into nutrition and these aspects and changing when we don't have enough energy, or we're like, I hit myself, that really hurt now. It's like, this is taking time for repair. I
Mhm.
can't just go out there and just like hit myself 50 times and nothing will happen. so so lifestyle being critical, guilt, and this social programming that we have, which is the other aspect of the Phoenix program, which is pretty much unlearning, taking into considering, seeing the whole picture. Like, we need our waking behavior, what we do in the day, during the day, what we do at night, or prepare for night, and how to protect our sleep, really guard it. Like, but the more you worry about sleeping, the less efficient you'll be at sleeping because you're stressing about it.
Mhm.
So when you start like falling into this lifestyle and pattern to like, hey, just kind of like relax. What do you want to do? Which comes into guilt is useful to create a social role. What you do in the day. So for people like you and myself that we're like really creating everything, and like, oh yeah, but I need to eat and I have to work more, and these these worries that we have, at least in the beginning, then we overdo it and we don't separate our social role for economic resources and our own well-being and just living. And we don't like set a time frame like, oh, this is my cutoff time now, it's Ryan time. It's no more advising, it's Ryan time. So when you start doing that, sleep efficiency goes up. You repair, you're better at what you do, you enjoy it. You're not just fueled for, I don't like calling it fight or flight. It's very common. I think it's like a psychological um, born from that, but there's no button, it's not like a boom. Oh, now you're stressed. No, it's a gradual thing. Like you start waking up, you start moving resources so you can move. You start going to bed, you want to cool down, you want to relax, you want to get off social media, you want to stop stimulating, and it's like an elevator. So going into those practices, nutrition is part of it, as in sleep hygiene, pre-sleep hygiene practice. However, it's not the whole thing. So taking it easy. Like I said, like don't fast all the time. If you want to fast 3 to 5 days, you're going to have high cortisol as opposed to high melatonin. You have to, because your body's saying, like, you need more resources. Go out there. Here goes a messenger molecule, a hormone, so you can move. There
Mhm.
goes the adrenaline. That's why the last days in fasting, it's like, oh, you're really low in fats, then body fat, then you will not be able to sleep. You'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you will not be able to sleep. That's the moment where you're like, oh, this is the end of the fast. I have to break it. It doesn't matter. We're done.
Got it. So I think a lot of listeners might be like, guys, you didn't really give us an answer here. When should I eat? And I think what you would say is don't listen to a rule. There is no rule. The rules will change. You should gauge your body, be aware of your body. Let me put one more thing out there. If I'm going to radically change my eating schedule, I'm going to go with, I think, what is the majority view here. A lot of people recommend, including Dr. Wallach, they say eat like a king for breakfast, eat like a prince for lunch, eat like a pauper for dinner. And this is the opposite to what I've been doing basically for many years. So big breakfast, medium lunch, small dinner, a little bit of snacking, not right before you go to bed, but in the later parts of the day, just a little bit of snacking. You're tapering off your eating during the day. A lot of people seem to think that that's more of an optimal schedule. What do you think?
I'd have to agree with Dr. Wallach with that one. Even when your skeletal muscle takes in like all those nutrients, you have your high growth hormone or different, hormones that are pretty much going to suck up all that and put it into your bone, right? When it comes to also when you have breakfast, well, to give a certain time of what I believe is healthy, but it also, like I said, depends on performance, maybe between 10 and 12, right? But if you really have to do a lot of things earlier, then have to eat
So kind
earlier.
of kind of a late breakfast, brunch.
Kind of a late breakfast would be in general, a good place. But if you have a presentation, if you have to be like really spot on, if you don't, you're not that, you don't have that easiness to concentrate and for whichever reason, have breakfast earlier. Maybe not such a strong, but eat something,
Hmm.
you know, but it's more occasional. So I would go for that time frame in general. And but yeah, I would agree with Dr. Wallach on that. Like eat like a king, like eat more in the morning. So that's when your body's really gonna use up and put it in, like the muscular skeletal aspect of it. It's really gonna suck it up. You've got your growth hormone levels highest, not at night. It's during the day, right?
And by the way, the usual recommendation is that breakfast has a lot of protein in it.
Yeah.
It's not all fruits. It's a varied, it's
Yeah.
it's got
Yeah. Totally.
fat, it's got protein, it's got carbs in it as well. Very few people actually fully recommend the keto. I know there's a lot out there floating around about the keto, but when it really comes down to it, reading the books, listening to people who've been doing this for decades and who've gone through the research themselves, very few of them actually promote keto by itself. The concept is nice in theory, but in practice, it's not very practical. I'm just saying, don't be afraid of carbs. There are a lot of people afraid of carbs. You do not need to completely cut carbs at all to lose weight. You don't need to. If you cut down the amount of food that you're eating, if you're eating too much in general, which many people are, that plus having the nutrients, throw a bit of exercise in there. Don't stay up all night scrolling on the phone. Reset your circadian rhythms so that you're producing your hormones properly, which tell your other organs to produce the metabolic hormones, basically. Get that in line so your metabolic hormones will be in line as well. And you do not need to quit carbs. Stop eating processed carbs. Sure, everybody should stop eating processed carbs, but it's not necessary to completely cut carbs to lose weight. In fact, you could probably increase your carbs. If it's from potatoes and fruit and stuff, you could probably increase them and still lose weight. So it's not about the specific type of food, but don't cut out any one major group of it. Like don't go to zero fat, don't go to zero carb, in my opinion. We need a balance of all this. We're not going to get into the ratios because just like this whole conversation, if you were to get into the ratios, so-called optimal ratios in quotes there, you would get the same basic answer from me and probably from Yanik as well, that don't listen to the ratios because the ratios are going to change throughout life. It's going to change depending on your level of activity and so on and so on. So there is no hard and fast rules. You'll just need to kind of take all this into account when you're coming up with your schedule. And if you're eating for convenience, like me, that's most of the reason why I've been on intermittent fasting for so long. If you're doing it for convenience, it's probably not the best way to go. Most things that are convenient are not healthy. And
McDonald's can be convenient. It's
yes.
fast.
And this is, like I said, I'm doing good. I'm doing great right now, actually. But I know that I'm missing something. I know that I'm not at 100%. And even right now, like I said, I am genuinely hungry. Thoughts are kind of falling out of my head and everything. I'm not performing at 100% right now, like at this exact second. I know that for a fact. And I know directly this is because I haven't eaten yet.
Yeah. And I'm pretty much fasting as well. I'm just this what I'm drinking is not breaking the fast yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's life is dynamic. So nothing is really rigid and everything changes. So just go with the wave, stop trying to row somewhere and just like sail a little bit more. That would be my take on fasting, on eating, on pretty much everything.
Don't let it give you health anxiety, basically. A lot of people have health
Right.
anxiety. They're over stressing about what is supposed to be the healthiest thing, and that stress itself is holding them back.
Completely.
A lot of
100%.
easygoing people out there eating hot dogs and beer, and they're fine. They don't have high blood pressure or something.
Yeah, they're amazing cases. I'm like, really? Oh my God. It's like they're good. Okay.
Their mindset must be like 90% of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to agree.
So, Yannick, I always enjoy talking to you. A couple of hours
Always.
flies by. We've got a couple more episodes planned, so look forward to that in the audience. And would you like to tell them where to get a hold of you if they would like to work with you and get on the Phoenix program?
Sure. Yeah, always a pleasure, Ryan. It's fun to be talking about all these things, huh? Yeah, they can search for me at my website, which is Phoenix with an F, phoenix-program.com. So it's phoenix-program.com. And my phone number, if anyone wants to send a message or anything, is 424-522-4329. So that's a way to really, it's on my website as well. So I have no issue, giving it out. That's where they can see a little bit more of the techniques I apply, the methodology, pretty much the message I give out each time I talk. And that's the way anyone could schedule an initial assessment to see where they're at and have a tailored strategy, So anyone who's interested, they can go through that side. And the unique aspect of what I do is it really goes a lot into lifestyle, but it also really goes deep into reprogramming if people are interested to really be able to shift a mindset into behavior. So it is dual, but like I said, we just see what everyone craves for and we'll see from there,
Yannick's all about that customization, so definitely check him out. His information is in the description as well. And of course, remember that you can always find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org. That includes the books that I've written and helped publish, the free audiobook versions of all of those in the audiobook section on the website. Video and audio is available. And I've got hundreds of book reviews there. Most of them are about health. Don't waste your time reading bad health books, in my opinion. I've spent years reading bad health books, so you don't have to. Find the gems for you and recommend them. A lot of people appreciate that, honestly. And of course, there's also an archive of this podcast on the website, and you can download those episodes for free. And remember, that's notusbooks.org. And Yanik, once again, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to our next talk.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, it'll be great. Okay, nice talking to you, Ryan.
Great. Thank you, Yanik. Thank you, everybody else. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.